Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of AAC in the Cloud. The presenter for this session will be Darla. And so I just want to let you know that we're going to be working together on this.
Just let me know when I can launch into this.
Okay, Darla, let's give this a whirl.
Good evening. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I am just going to start before everything else that I had some technical difficulties on my end, so someone else is going to be running my slides for me. It's going to sound a little old school, but I get to pretend I am an old-timey professor by saying slide. So without further ado, slide.
Okay, Darla, I'm trying to figure out why it's trying to play it on my end while I'm sharing, so I'm trying to figure that out just a second.
Let's all just pretend that the slide projector is broken and imagine I am launching into some long-winded speech about some old-timey academic project. Unfortunately, my computer likes to crash when I try to share my screen, so we have had to find workaround.
Darla, will you minimize the screen showing the Zoom? Maybe that will help.
No luck on your end? If you could put the slide link up in the chat, people can work from there if necessary. And we can add the slides back in post.
Okay, Darla, well, I'm going to share my screen and put up the PowerPoint. Let's see if it works again.
Let's see if we, hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Was the concern that there was an echo? Are you hearing an echo in the audio? Because it sounds fine to me.
Sounds good on my end also.
Okay, so you're not able to share your slide. That's the only issue, Darla.
Yes.
Okay. Josh, if you can hear me, I think Darla sent you the slides. If you can just share your screen, then you could have the slides up, and then Darla can talk, and you can just kind of try to keep track of where she's at in the slides. And then, like you said, Darla, if we need to update it post, we can always do that. Thanks everybody for bearing with us. Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Now we've got some slides up. I will get out of the way.
Good evening. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I am just going to start before everything else that I had some technical difficulties on my end, so someone else is going to be running my slides for me. It's going to sound a little old school, but I get to pretend I am an old-timey professor by saying slide. So without further ado, slide. Slide. My name is Darla Burrow. I have a Master's of Information specializing in library science, and I currently work in e-learning for the Ottawa Hospital. I am autistic and a full-time AAC user. This is my second year officially presenting at AAC in the cloud, and I am very excited to be here. The PowerPoint attached to this presentation contain a full transcript in the notes, and I will be linking a PDF of the transcript afterwards. Please note that the transcript is what I am putting into my device, so sometimes things won't be spelled right, or might look weird. I have to use weird spellings sometimes to make words sound right. Slide. My topic this evening is about using AAC to talk about passions, interests, hobbies, and just in general the things you love. This is directed both at AAC users and those who are supporting them. For the first group, I hope that I can give you some ideas that have worked for me, maybe spark a new strategy or two. For the second, I want to talk about both the realities and the importance of having access to the language around these topics, and some not so obvious benefits thereof. As an AAC user, this is a very special topic to me. I have a lot of things I am very passionate about. I mostly use text-to-speech through Proloquo for text, but I also use Proloquo to go when typing is harder or my brain does not want to use words in the right way. I am trying to use Proloquo to go more because it can be easier when I am stressed. Some struggles I ran into with it, the same struggles I ran into when I first started using AAC, were a big reason why I am doing this presentation. This presentation is mostly about simple-based AAC, but I will also touch on how these principles can be incorporated into text-to-speech. I use my Proloquo to go as an example, But obviously the technical side of things may work a little bit differently if you are using Cough Drop or Snap Plus Core, etc. You will also note that I generally use either symbols or text in this app, not both at the same time. This is a personal preference for me, as I find that my brain processes symbol-based AAC better without image labels. It has to do with visual crowding. That and issues with fine motor control are why I use a larger grid side as well. On to the presentation. Slide. This presentation is broken into 3 sections. 1. Theory. Why is this important? How can we think outside the box about language? What differences can this make? In the first third, I will talk about the theory and explanations that underlie the other 2 parts. 2. Basic organization. I will talk about the basic principles of organizing for interests, where to start, how to develop it, and the general assurance that, yes, this is going to take some work. 3. Continued and more in-depth organization. How far down should interest-specific vocabulary go? And how can it be used to not just develop communication partners, but communication partners who can identify where vocabulary might be lacking and suggest useful words to have? Also, before I want to get into this, I want to just say this. This presentation is for AAC users of all levels of skill and vocabulary. Some parts might not necessarily be what a given AAC user needs or wants right now, but I think there are lessons that can help everyone and help people have more in-depth conversations about the stuff they love. Slide. Why is it important to have access to detailed vocabulary about interests and hobbies? Well, because we all have them. We all have things that we love, that really interest us, and we should all be able to discuss them. And yes, I am saying this as an autistic woman who has been very interested in tabletop role-playing games and fantasy literature from the time she learned to read. Which, to be fair, was when I was 9.5, but the point still stands. If you are a person who uses their mouth to speak, especially if you do not have any form of communication disability, you naturally acquire this vocabulary over time. If you watch a TV show, you pick up character names and important words to the plot. You remember episode names, the names of shows it might be related to, the actors, the director. It goes on. You might remember a few catchphrases from it, or just funny lines that you incorporate into other language, or that you use to communicate to other fans that you, too, like this thing. Slide. If you speak with your mouth, this can occur naturally, organically, and often without you really thinking about it. You watch, you hear, you absorb, you say. The same goes for interest in books, history, cooking, sports, whatever. But if you are an AAC user, suddenly the language you can use to express your interests and hobbies becomes substantially more limited. You might know all of the same information as a speaking person, but if you are using a device to speak about it, your device needs to know that same information as well. For text-to-speech, it might need to be programmed how to properly say specific words. I love cooking, and there are a number of ingredients that my text-to-speech cannot naturally say correctly. Like lemongrass, which it only says properly now because I programmed it to. The way the word is supposed to be say, the stress is on the first syllable. But my device wanted to put it on the second. For simple users, this becomes even more complicated, because every single one of those words needs to be programmed in and paired to a button. It might need a symbol, depending on how someone uses their device, or the text might be enough. But you still need to put everything in. This whole presentation came about because in my bid to make Proloquo 2 Go more readily usable, I had to be able to talk about my own interests. and I fell down a rabbit hole. Slide. I am a big fan of a Japanese television genre called Takusu, and I'm plugged into a big fan community for it. I used to see, hang out, and chat with friends about this sort of stuff, so it seems like a great place to start. Takusu roughly translates as special effects, and covers everything from superhero shows like Super Sentai, which is adapted in North America into Power Rangers, to Godzilla. If it's got a person in spandex fighting a monster in a rubber suit, it's Takusu. I decided that I was going to create a folder to talk about another Takusu show called Kamen Rider. I thought this would be simple. Kamen Rider has been running since 1971, sure, but I really have only been watching it for the last 10 years, and each year it features a whole new set of characters. I thought that would mean it would be easy. I could just break it down by season and still get the nuances down. Slide. Oh well, I was very wrong. Some lessons were definitely learned here, and as a full confession I am still working on it today. Okay, so the last 10 years means that I needed to have folders for a few things: show names, main character secret identities, villainous group names. That seemed like a good place to start. Easy enough, most series only need one of each. Except when they don't. I ran into my first mistake here. I was creating a conceptually relevant core vocabulary for talking about Kamen Rider, and it might pass for a very limited conversation, but even then it wouldn't let me express the full depth of my interest or knowledge. In a conversation with fellow Kamen Rider fans I would not be able to add much beyond making it clear that I may have watched the shows. Slide. I went back to the drawing board. And I was literally starting to sketch the organization out on a piece of paper, which wasn't exactly convenient because I have dysgraphia, but it was helpful to have a visual model to work with before going in. Side note, no seriously, when doing this organization it helps to draw this all out. I will get into that idea when I talk about basic organization, but if you are helping an AAC user, or are an AAC user who has enough hand control to hold a pen or a stylus, this will save you a lot of pain. Anyway, I realized that to have an in-depth conversation I had to start tackling a fair bit of information for each series. The names of secondary characters, including their secret identities. The names of different monsters. The names of different superpowers. Because Kamen Rider is a show made to sell toys, and that means lots of little gadgets to give a rider a new power. Slide. The deeper I started looking at going, the more information I needed, the more I started realizing that within the Kamen Rider fan community this was core vocabulary. This wasn't a fringe language folder I was creating. I wouldn't be jumping in to grab a word or two and then jumping back out. If I was involved in an in-depth fan conversation I wasn't going to be leaving it much. Which sort of turned the whole idea of having a core language homepage and ready access to core vocabulary on its head. This was situationally relevant core vocabulary because it was going so weirdly deep into it. Slide. Does this story have a point? Yes. It's this: being able to talk about your interests in depth with other fans builds communication partners. It builds connections, it makes friends, it gets you involved with people outside your immediate circle, and it gets those people familiar with AAC. The more familiar they become, the more they can facilitate further communication. A relevant personal story: I am a big tabletop role-playing game fan, and when I moved to Ottawa I started attending a local convention for that. The first year I was a bit nervous and played in one game. It went okay. The next year I was invited by a friend to play in several games he was running. At the first game my friend was quick to explain the basics. This is Darla, she's autistic, she uses an iPad because she can't speak with her mouth, and she is wearing headphones because it is very loud but can still hear you. He made a point of making space for me in conversation and helping me when we had communication issues. Some of the same people showed up for the second game he ran. And suddenly they were following his lead, helping explain to the people who hadn't already met me, and making space and conversation for me. By the end of the day I was on game 4 and things were going very smoothly because people had spent the last 12 hours or so getting used to how I talk and actively asking what accommodations or supports I might need. And that was sort of proof of concept of what you can do when you can express the full range of your interests. Obviously, again, it is a bit easier since I was typing, but even still having the language down allowed me to teach communication partners, who taught others, which let me be completely included. Slide. Now let's talk about where to start and the basics of using this kind of design strategy. Simply put, if you are assisting an AAC user, ask them. If you are an AAC user, you know what you want to be able to say. You may just need to work on how to best organize it. But no, seriously. If you are working with an AAC user to program their device, this process cannot work without their input. Maybe that is pointing at pictures, maybe it's drawing, maybe it's sitting down with them and watching a show or reading a book and showing what they are interested in talking about. This may take some time, and potentially some frustration on both sides, but it is also going to make it a lot easier for them to interact with the resulting vocabulary. Slide. Start small. Get the basics down. Allow mistakes to happen. Be prepared for frustration. And like I said earlier, don't be afraid to draw some diagrams. A lot of folders are going to get nested. What you are seeing on the slide is a very rough drawing of how my Kamen Rider vocabulary is nested. This is not the original drawing, because I accidentally threw that away because I drew it on scrap paper. I apologize that it's not very good, or necessarily very legible, but I work with what I have. Having diagrams like this can also be helpful if folks are like me and have trouble with visualization. Start with making sure you have some basic core words there. This isn't just going to be a list of terms, but your first level is where the conversation starts. The idea is to not have to go all the way back to your home screen, and to not have to jump between too many folders outside of this vocabulary and its nesting. Slide. Then start identifying different vocabulary groups. By organizing them into individual folders, we can quickly jump from them back to the main page. This is unlike most other ways of organizing AAC, where fringe vocabulary is organized by broad concept, so you take the people folder to get to the family folder. In that situation, you aren't going to the people folder for a word, then the family folder, then back to the people folder to continue the conversation. It's just a convenient way of organizing things. Instead, for this, we are centralizing an entire subject, and the folder contents will interrelate. In the Kamen Rider example, I have the basic folder that houses some basic words universal across the series, the name of the show, the common term rider kick for the superpowered kick move that is a hallmark of the series, including words like monster, hero, TV show, watch, etc. Slide. I think I may have missed a slide. but I will keep going. Then I identify the next level down, the series names, for instance, which are also the main characters. Since the series naming format is always the same, I don't need to put Kamen Rider in front of them. I just need the actual one-word name. In this folder all I have used are the show names, and paired them to logos. This is, admittedly, where stuff like TV shows, dinosaurs, or plants might be easier to program than Percy Jackson or talking about a particular music genre. Nice, convenient, easily identifiable graphics. This folder doesn't contain any additional vocabulary, it exists solely to access a single sort of word, then jump back to the main Kamen Rider folder. Why am I doing it like that? Because it saves space and creates an easy reference point, especially because I use a larger grid size. I want to, as much as possible, navigate via folders rather than having to scroll the page. It also allows for fast and immediate access to words. I know exactly where they are going to be. The graphics are one of the most painful parts of this whole thing, because to make them easily identifiable on such a small scale I had to do a lot of cropping and resizing. It took longer than most of the other work combined. And is something I am still refining. But it is also a pain, because these folders are going to contain a lot of very specific buttons. This is why, if you are helping an AAC user, their input is critical. They need to be able to identify what is being used and understand where things go. You're establishing a symbolic shorthand, but it has to be one that they will select and recognize. I highly recommend using Google image searches. For talking about my book collection, I tried individually photographing and cropping every cover, and it took absolutely ages. A quick Google image search took about half the time, and I can guarantee you that 99% of the images for most hobbies are going to be there. Slide. Okay, so you start building the folder. You figure out the necessary core vocabulary in the first level, and build the individual folders to take things more in depth based on the AAC user's interests. But just how deep are you going to go? The answer is as deep as the person needs and is able to access to express their passion and knowledge. This is where, when you nest deeper into a given folder, you are nesting based on concepts. So we go from Kamen Rider to main characters to real names, because the fandom will often use a character's actual name to avoid confusion. Like talking about Peter Parker to make it clear you're talking about the character and not the comic book, or because it's relevant to differentiate something Peter Parker does from Spider-Man. That only nests so deep. With the Kamen Rider stuff, I generally don't nest much deeper than 2 or 3 levels, because that covers the type of language I need. A folder for Rider powers is going to go to a folder with generic language, then 2 folders for each series, then each folder contains different powers or moves. First level, second level, third level, and that is an extreme case. If we are talking about something more centralized, like the Percy Jackson novels, we might create folders for the characters, then nest folders for main characters, side characters, gods, and villains, then maybe another for locations, another for magical stuff, and another for the books themselves, because when you talk about a book series you need to be able to talk about the books themselves. Slide. At some point, inevitably, you are going to stall out. I know I did. You are going to think things are done, you have all the words available that are needed. You will always, and I feel like this holds true for every situation with AAC, you will always hit words that you didn't think to add. And that, my friends, is where engagement with fan communities and developing communication partners in those communities becomes huge. Having the language to engage with them and express passion, interest, and knowledge builds communication partners who are, in the moment, potentially able to recognize what might be missing. In the moment, that doesn't necessarily mean programming the device, though it certainly could if the AAC user involved was comfortable with someone else touching their device. But even a blank in the conversation, a word you don't know or cannot remember, is acceptable and something other people can fill in. If I run into a word that my device cannot pronounce, generally my close friends understand fairly immediately what I am talking about. I am not always able to reprogram for accurate pronunciation on the fly. In these cases, I will just make a note and fix it when I get home, or figure out different ways to spell it in the moment, develop a shorthand. Slide. I have focused most of this on symbol-based AAC, but you can absolutely apply many of these principles in text-to-speech. This is especially true if the text-to-speech app that you use allows for abbreviations and shortcuts. In these cases, it helps to save longer phrases or statements, or abbreviate longer single words. The nesting is obviously going to be different here, because most text-to-speech users are already going to be able to improvise words on the fly. Still, there are certain things that can work well with this method. Catchphrases, for instance, are a good example. Taglines. Important bits of dialogue. Having those available immediately can definitely help in hobby conversations, especially with other people who enjoy that hobby. And having them immediately available on command, instead of having to type them, allows you to more easily insert them into conversation. To continue with the Kamen Rider example, Kamen Rider Double says, "Now, count up your sins," or "It's time to count your crimes," depending on translation, when he faces a villain. Especially if I am trying to get my device to pronounce the Japanese, it really helps to have that in a folder ahead of time. But if I use it in conversation with another Kamen Rider fan, especially in semi-correct context, it is an immediate proof positive of my love of the show. Slide. Incidentally, getting off hobbies for a moment, I actually rewrote that last sentence from my original draft. I was going to say that it was an immediate shibboleth, but then realized that maybe using semi-obscure biblical references was a bad plan. And yet, in and of itself, to make reference to saying shibboleth can be a proof positive in some circles. And yes, this methodology works great for religion as well if you are getting deeper than the day-to-day basics of worship. This will vary from religion to religion, obviously, but there are certain pieces of text, be they stories from the Gospels, a certain argument from the Talmud, or a piece of verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which can be widely applicable in conversation. And being able to talk about that also helps to be involved with a religious community. This can help ensure AAC user involvement in religious rituals at home, like sitting at Seder or saying grace. Again, having access to multiple and more complex levels of language and description allow for greater expression and involvement. Slide. Another place this helps is talking about cooking. Not all AAC users are necessarily able to cook, but if they like food, then providing language to describe not only basic meals, but deeper flavors, sensations, and components can be a huge thing, especially when ingredients, methods, or flavors are not well expressed with basic Western-centered food language. My simple app came preloaded with words like hamburger and fried egg, but what about jollof rice, lemongrass, or umami? It is one thing to say that you like a dish, it is a whole other thing to be able to explain why, to say what you like about it, and potentially even critique it. And if the AAC user can cook, then they now have access to describe what ingredients they need, areas where they might need help, add to the shopping list, plan out specific dishes, and what tools are needed. This can also be helpful for visual cues for recipes for people with executive functioning issues for whom a standard written recipe may not be accessible or ideal. In this example, for instance, we would start with a big cooking folder, then nest different sorts of ingredients, utensils, appliances, and dishes. Then under dishes we might further nest folders for each dish in our repertoire, or which we enjoy. Ingredient lists, words to describe flavor and effect, words to describe techniques. Heck, if you just have a folder of every available herb and spice in your cupboard, suddenly you have the language to improvise a dish with them. To say, I like this soup, but I think it could use some oregano and some lemon juice. Slide. Building vocabulary folders in this way provides clear access to language to talk about interests, hobbies, and passions. In these situations, these folders contain core words important to expressing interest and knowledge and taking part in conversations. By building in this nested format, you increase the speed of access to necessary language by jumping back to the home screen and fringe language folders as much as possible. This method is going to take work, yes, but I hope that I have outlined for you the theory behind it and some tools and tricks for how to achieve it. I am someone who is deeply engaged in fan communities and who has great love for her hobbies. Being able to have conversations with other people about them, as an AAC user, and to have my interests and passions respected have been an enormous boost to my self-esteem and my level of socialization. I deeply, desperately want to see more AAC users able to talk about these same things, because among other things it makes AAC fun. It makes language fun and engaging because we all have so much going on inside our heads and so much to share. We just need access to the vocabulary to let it out. And I know, some of you are shaking your heads and saying that this can't be applicable to the AAC user you are supporting. I know because every time I do a presentation like this I hear that one. And my argument to you there is, why not try? Do you have anything to lose from trying? Worst case scenario, either they don't feel the need to engage, or have difficulty and you refine, or they start talking your ear off about a video game or a TV show. Being an AAC user can be very isolating. But it doesn't have to be. Try this, take some chances, and look at the potential for engagement. Slide. I know that a lot of other people share their social media or the like, but I would rather not. I don't share a lot of AAC relevant material there. Instead, I want to recommend that you look at groups like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, Autistics for Autistics, and Autistics United Canada. I especially want to encourage you to pay attention to issues stemming from the intersection of ableism and racism. Pay attention to BIPOC folks who speak up about the very different treatment their disabilities, particularly neurodivergences like autism, receive compared to white people with the same disability. This is a major issue right now, and I really encourage every white member of the audience to educate yourself more on this, and how in particular Black and Indigenous communities are in terms of diagnosis and support access. So thoughts about it for me. I will take questions in the time we have left, or if there are no questions we can all call it a night early and I can treat myself to a strongbow at the convention bar. Which is, to say, my fridge. Good night everyone. Stay safe.
All right, Darla, let's see if there's any questions. I'll check Slack and see if there's any questions in there. Several people are typing, so let's just give it a second.
Okie dokie.
All right, one of the questions is, I have a couple students that I have trouble finding out their interests. Any ideas?
Talk to their family, show them some material, see if something clicks. Do they bring toys of any kind to school? It's going to take some investigating and engaging with their families for sure. But definitely also offer them options there. Give them the chance to build their interests at school if possible. I think that is what I can suggest there. Next question.
Okay, Darla, the next question is, do you have a rule of thumb for when you think a button or folders needs to be created of custom buttons versus typing on a keyboard page?
For symbol based, I try to stick with buttons as much as possible because my headspace for typing to talk and my headspace for symbols can be very different. For text to speech, generally I put longer stuff in buttons and categories. I even use that for some words in shorthand. I strongly dislike the term inspirational. As a side note, it has a lot of baggage for dis old folks. Next question.
Darla, are you looking at the Slack channel?
I am, sorry.
Well, then I don't know why I'm reading the questions to you if you're looking at them. Maybe we're doing that so all the people who watch later on will be able to know what the questions were.
It makes it feel more official.
Okay, let's give it just another second and see if there's any other questions. And if not, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Alyssa knows what I am talking about there. Official officialness indeed.
Darla, you're always welcome to answer questions. Don't worry about that.
Heather, to address text versus symbols, give me a moment. It is a very different sort of headspace. Sometimes it is due to emotions, because it becomes harder to focus on creating words, and because my fine motor control goes out the window when I'm frustrated or tired or angry or whatever, so I prefer to go to symbols there, but I do not always have a ton to say. But I want to use symbols more because they create a very different language interface experience that is hard to describe to people who do not already use AAC. It is like thinking of language in pieces and thinking of meaning and concepts and having this convenient way to make them words. Total credit to us Win for that phrasing, by the way. But yeah, it's just a very different way to interact with language that doesn't require the same sort of word creation thinking that you get with typing. I type fast and I enjoy it, but symbols are also great. Any other questions? Amazingly, I got it to 650 this year. Let's see if we can fill the next 10 minutes. Any takers?
All right, there's another question. So when you make your nested folders of special interest items, are you going back and forth between them and your core words, or do you keep some of the core words handy on those pages so that you don't have to go in and out as much?
Great question. I keep core words handy on some of the pages depending on topic, and keep more core words on the first level folder. I have a lot of them set to snap back after I select something, especially if they are only 1 or 2 levels deep, as I generally won't have to select more than 1 or 2 options from them for a given sentence. Does that help explain things, Christine? Awesome sauce. Thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone who attended. I think we may have time for one more question, or do I get my cider a few minutes early? Christine, I am terrified of confronting Star Wars with this method. There is too much even for me.
All right, that's fair. Star Wars would definitely be scary.
Just the ship's page alone would be enormous.
You're not wrong.
Have you looked at a technical manual? They almost have enough descriptions to build your own X-Wing. It is terrifying. But also super useful to have that language, because the fan community is so passionate. Believe me, you go up to a Star Wars fan and start talking about a fringe character from one of the TV shows, and you are pretty much in. Maybe for next year, Heather. I think we are at a good place to stop here. Would you agree, Josh?
Yeah, I think we're good. Obviously, if people have other questions, they can put them in Slack. And if you want to stay in that channel there for a little bit, Darla, then you can help answer questions there.
Totally.
Well, we want to thank everyone for attending this session of AAC in the Cloud, and we look forward to more sessions tomorrow. And Darla, thank you very much.
And thank you, you have been awesome.